A shocking statement from the White House. No one expected this. A real catastrophe in Russia, million losses for the Russian Federation. And a fateful conversation between Trump and Zelensky. The 18th package of sanctions will really bring the Kremlin to its knees. Russian oil, it's over. The most devastating sanctions since the beginning of the war. Russia is preparing to advance on Kyiv and the entire north of Ukraine, or it may head toward Odessa and the border with Romania. Their plans have already been revealed. Meanwhile, the new Ukrainian UAV is better than the Lancet, and the Moscow region is under attack. A key facility of Russia's military-industrial complex has been destroyed, the Rezonit Technopark. Russia is preparing an attack on Nato. German intelligence is sounding the alarm. Watch all of this in the new episode of Hotspot. Shock. The White House has unexpectedly addressed Russians with congratulations and words about a bright future. Meanwhile, 1 million occupiers have already been eliminated. And in the US, preparations are underway to welcome Trump at the G7 summit. A fateful conversation with Zelensky or with Putin. What is actually going on? The Americans have a cunning plan to tame Russia. All the details are in the plot.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio published a congratulatory message on Russia Day on the State Department website.
On behalf of the American people, I want to congratulate Russians on Russia Day.
Obviously, Trump is still under the illusion that it's possible to strike a great deal, a big deal with the Russian Federation where he would somehow benefit from it. That's why, unfortunately, Secretary of State Rubio continues to follow his boss's line.
Meanwhile, while Trump and his team are trying to please Putin, Putin is arming himself and continues to boast about nuclear weapons and supposedly the most advanced nuclear triad.
Well, first of all, Putin is trying to play down the situation after the successful SBU special operation web, which damaged strategic bombers, and he's not commented on this situation. But now he decided to say that our triad is very strong, the most advanced, and so on.
A prolonged war without support from Ukraine's partners would be the ideal scenario for Putin, stated Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. According to the Ukrainian head of state, the Kremlin dictator cannot withstand the prolonged war with partners and sanctions, which is why he creates the appearance of a negotiation process.
We see that the United States of America is reducing its support for Ukraine, transferring missiles that were intended for Ukraine to the Middle East instead. Politically, they are not even neutral, but probably more on the side of the Russian Federation. Therefore, we do not see any particularly proactive actions in this direction. Well, yes, thank God there is still an exchange of intelligence information. Some arms deliveries that were planned are still ongoing, but in principle we are preparing for the fact that the United States of America will be involved less and less.
In the coming days, the president of Ukraine has been invited to 3 important events for the country: the EU summit, the G7 summit and the NATO summit. All 3 events are platforms for important diplomatic meetings, including with the US President Donald Trump.
What should not be expected is an invitation to join NATO. What should we expect? Most likely there will be new aid packages. I think on the sidelines of the summit, new support formats for Ukraine will be discussed, at least within the coalition of the willing. I think there will be exchanges of experience in various formats. Ukraine's experience is especially interesting both in the field of drones and more broadly in conducting military operations against the Russian Federation. I think we will see a shift in NATO leadership on the part of the United States of America. A major role here will be played by France, Germany and the United Kingdom, who will likely try to take the initiative and come forward with certain proposals. At the very least, I think the Nordic countries as well as the Baltic states will be very proactive.
In the draft of the final declaration of the NATO summit, Russia is recognized as a threat to Euro-Atlantic security. However, it is not referred to as an aggressor against Ukraine. There is not a single mention of China in the document, even though it was previously called a decisive factor contributing to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
China has its own agenda and its own track of negotiations with the United States of America. China is winning the tariff war that was started by Trump himself. Essentially, Trump is feeling a lot of pressure from the big money interests in the United States, who are saying that this kind of relationship with China is unprofitable since they are very interconnected in a globalized world. Frankly, this was obvious to anyone. Only Donald Trump decided that he was the only smart one who had any levers of influence.
Realizing he had lost, Trump went to make amends with China. As a result, representatives of the US and China agreed on a framework deal to return to a trade truce and lift China's export restrictions on rare earth elements.
The 18th package of EU sanctions is at risk of falling through. Putin's fifth column within the European Union is trying to block it. But why? Meanwhile, oil is dropping to $45, and this could be a fatal blow to Russian banks and could crush Russia. What are the elites hiding, and why could this sanctions package be the most devastating one yet? Find out right now.
$45 per barrel of oil. The European Commission has announced the details of the new 18th package of sanctions, and the new measures to rein in the aggressor promise nothing good for them.
The 18th package of sanctions, a ban on the use of the Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 infrastructure, lowering the price cap on Russian oil from $60 to $45 per barrel, disconnecting another 22 Russian banks from the SWIFT system, at least 70 new ships from Russia's shadow fleet will be added to the sanctions list, and a ban on port access and shipping services.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The EU Executive Committee wants to lower prices for Russian oil, thereby tightening energy and financial sanctions. These measures are intended to significantly reduce the Kremlin's ability to wage war against Ukraine.
We fully agree with the goal of using these large-scale sanctions to bring Russia to the negotiating table and to take negotiations seriously, leading to a just and lasting peace. And that is why I am absolutely confident that we will achieve this price cap goal of $45.
A price cap of $60 was agreed upon at the G7 summit back in December 2022. At that time, a barrel of oil cost over $100, but in just over 3 years, the price of black gold had already dropped to $60, rendering the sanctions meaningless. The new limit of $45 per barrel will make the sanctions effective again, since the money earned from oil exports makes up a third of Russia's budget revenues.
There will be a further deterioration of the situation, and the Russian budget is based on, well, roughly $70 per barrel. So the budget will be severely lacking in funds. Russia will be extremely short of foreign currency to pay for imports, and the Russian economy, and indeed the well-being of its citizens, is highly dependent on imported goods. They can print rubles, but there will be much less foreign currency because oil has become cheaper.
The 18th package against Russia also proposes tightening measures against the shadow fleet, which allows the Kremlin to export oil at prices above the established limit. The package aims to include another 70 shadow fleet vessels, which would bring the total number of sanctioned ships to over 400. One EU diplomat estimated that the fleet currently numbers about 800 tankers, whereas 2 years ago there were only 100.
When sanctions are imposed on them, Russia's shadow fleet tankers are unable to enter ports, forcing Russia to look for new vessels. This is more expensive and reduces profits.
Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has threatened to block the adoption of the EU's 18th sanctions package against Russia. The pro-Russian politician stated that he would not support the 18th package of sanctions unless the European Commission offers a real solution to the crisis Slovakia will face after the complete halt of gas, oil and nuclear fuel supplies from Russia. But most likely, Fico is simply trying to score political points in the current situation. The adoption of the 18th package is only a matter of time, since the Kremlin has not agreed even to a 30-day ceasefire. Putin continues to carry out massive shelling of Ukraine.
Moscow is preparing a new offensive. The threat now hangs over Kyiv, Volyn, Zhytomyr and Chernihiv. Meanwhile, Zelensky states that Russia's real objective is entirely different Odessa and access to the borders with Moldova and Romania. At the same time, Putin is increasing the size of the army and once again boasting about the nuclear triad. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces are striking the Moscow region. A key target is the Russian defense facility Resonance Technopark as Ukraine strikes directly at the enemy's rear.
Putin's occupiers are preparing for a new assault on Kyiv. Russian troops may launch a new offensive operation against the capital using the large-scale West 2025 exercises which are set to take place in Belarus as cover. This scenario is not ruled out by Lieutenant Colonel Maxim Zhurin, deputy commander of the legendary Third Separate Assault Brigade, but a decision on a possible offensive by the Russians has not yet been made.
It's unlikely they'll push through the Chernobyl zone. A strike from the direction of Zhytomyr, Rivne and so on is also unlikely, but cannot be ruled out. Do they have the forces for this? I'm not sure, considering they're currently redeploying divisions and units from the Sumy direction to Zaporizhia and vice versa.
And Russia also wants to take control of Odessa. After that, the enemy plans to reach the border with Romania and Moldova, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
They plan to take Odessa in two ways, if we remember. An amphibious operation was planned but it fell apart when our armed forces sank and damaged all the landing ships they had. They were based in Berdyansk and in Crimea. The remaining ships retreated to Novorossiysk. As for a breakthrough by land, in order to take Odessa, they would have to take Kherson again, cross the Dnipro, and go through Mykolaiv.
But for now, these are just possible scenarios. The occupiers have some real achievements. Their total losses in the war have exceeded 1 million personnel. Now, that's quite an anniversary for Russia Day.
So what, are we supposed to roll out the red carpet for them or something? Of course not.
And here are some more little gifts that have arrived. Agents from the partisan movement Atesh carried out a successful sabotage operation in temporarily occupied Melitopol. While passing on the congratulations to the occupiers, one of the partisans set fire to a Ural army truck. As a result, several invaders from the duty shift will remain in the Zaporizhzhia fields forever. And in addition, Ukraine's defense forces struck an electronics factory near Moscow that produces components for Russian weaponry. And while it's burning near Moscow, the Kremlin's master Putin has ordered his military command to multiply the combat capabilities of Russia's ground forces several times over and to coordinate the work of the military-industrial complex with the economy's mobilization plans.
What does it mean to multiply combat capabilities several times over? Tanks, as the main strike force in the era of constant drone attacks, have already ceased to be the primary offensive weapon. Aviation, well, we're fighting it quite successfully too. As for the ground forces, they've already resorted to launching attacks in Zhigulis and on motorcycles.
Putin has also demanded that bases, arsenals, and airfields be prepared in advance for new weapon systems so that they're not just deployed out in the open field.
In a timely manner, calculate the requirements and begin preparing the infrastructure for deploying new weapon systems, including bases, arsenals, airfields, and so on. The financial resources needed for the construction and modernization of such facilities must be allocated as a separate line in the program.
And of course, the Kremlin dictator once again boasted about his nuclear arsenal, claiming that it is the most advanced in the world.
Currently, the share of modern weapons and equipment in the strategic nuclear forces has already reached 95%. This is a good indicator. In fact, it is the highest among all the nuclear powers in the world, the highest indicator.
Here, judging by the numerous tests of the same Bulava, the same Oreshnik, which were not the most successful, not all of them, thank God, it's one thing to announce the adoption of some new unit or some new type of model, but it's another thing entirely to actually put them on combat duty. That is, they definitely have both Topol and Yars, both silo-based and mobile complexes. How modern they are and how much they differ from developments dating back to Soviet times is hard to say.
But the occupiers did manage to modernize their drones. Russia has likely used the new Geran 3 missile UAV during the attack on Kyiv.
Essentially, it's the same Shahed, but with a jet engine. There have been talks about its appearance since 2024, if I remember correctly. Remnants of a small turbojet engine were found after the Shahed or Geran 3 was shot down. Photos of this turbojet engine are online. They're already circulating. It's no secret. So there's nothing surprising about it. They're deploying new types of weapons. They're trying to increase the speed of their strike drones to make it harder for our air defense forces to intercept them.
Meanwhile, Israel has informed the United States of its readiness to launch a military operation in Iran. At the same time, as noted, Washington expects that Iran may retaliate by striking certain American targets in neighboring Iraq.
Details of the strike on the Rezonid plant in the Moscow region are key element of Russia's missile program. The front is shifting and it's changing rapidly. Ukraine has deployed a new strike drone, which is already pushing the Russian Lancet out of the sky. It's more powerful, more precise and smarter. On the ground, a new initiative volunteers are forming mobile air defense groups to protect against missiles and drones across the country. Air, ground, rear Ukraine is striking on all three fronts at once. A new generation Ukrainian drone that is pushing the Lancet out of the sky. Ukraine has brought a new class of strike UAV to the front called Bulava. Developed within the Brave One defense cluster by the company Devira, this drone is already carrying out combat missions and demonstrates advantages over the Russian Lancet in key parameters. A precise strike deep behind enemy lines. Bulava is not just a drone, but a full-fledged strike and reconnaissance system capable of accurately hitting high-priority targets from electronic warfare systems to Buk-M and Tor air defense systems, destroying both stationary and moving objects, transmitting real-time video confirmation of hits to ensure adjustment and mission control, and operating in the most challenging conditions while maintaining communication and carrying out tasks with high precision. Some features of the Bulava remain classified in order not to reveal the drone's full potential to the enemy. Technological superiority on the battlefield, The arrival of Bulava on the combat stage is not just a technical upgrade, it is Ukraine's asymmetric response, which is gradually pushing out the Russian Lancet and undermining the enemy's advantage in the drone war. The Ministry of Digital Transformation emphasizes technology's power, and every new development increases Ukraine's chances to endure and win. Meanwhile, a new line of air defense groups made up of volunteers are being formed in Ukraine. Ukraine is launching an experimental project, specifically the creation of air defense groups based on volunteer formations within territorial communities. The resolution has already been approved by the Cabinet of Ministers at the meeting on June 11. The main goal is to combat drones. The primary task of the new units is to detect and neutralize enemy strike UAVs. The project is intended to strengthen local air defense and involve motivated citizens who are not subject to mobilization. Now let's talk about who will be included in the groups and what equipment they will have. They will be formed on a territorial basis and will report to the commanders of the territorial defense forces, and in matters of air defense to the command of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Volunteers with the necessary training will be involved, who will be able to operate strike drones, manned aircraft, firearms, electronic warfare equipment, and technologies incorporating elements of artificial intelligence. There is also the matter of legalizing private aviation for air defense purposes. For the first time within the framework of the project, a mechanism has been established for the use of private manned aircraft, which will be utilized in the air defense system. A simplified registration process is being introduced. It will now take just 10 days instead of the previous 2 to 6 months. This will pave the way for integrating equipment that conscientious citizens have long been proposing. Financing and social protection. The project will be funded by the Ministry of Defense budget, local budgets, voluntary contributions through the Unite24 platform and other legal sources. Members of the groups will receive social guarantees similar to those provided to military personnel, monetary support, benefits, insurance payments, and so on. The creation of these groups will significantly strengthen territorial air defense and allow for a more flexible response to aerial threats. This is a step toward forming a people's air defense network where protecting the sky is a shared responsibility. Meanwhile, a blow has been dealt to the heart of Russian weaponry. A factory producing the brains for Russian missiles has been destroyed. Ukraine's defense forces delivered a precise strike on the Resonit plant in the Moscow region, one of the key enterprises supporting the Russian missile program. The attack took place on the night of June 12th, and its consequences could significantly impact the enemy's ability to produce high-precision weaponry. What kind of facility is this? Resonit is located just 40 kilometers from Moscow and is part of the Zubov Technopark, where companies work on developing electronics, microchips, navigation systems, and components for missile and naval weaponry. Now let's talk about what the plant produced. The enterprise specialized in manufacturing multi-layer printed circuit boards, flexible and flex-rigid boards, and high-precision microelectronics. These boards were integrated into guidance systems, flight control, data transmission, and navigation systems. Now let's discuss where these components were sent. Resonit's products were used in Iskander and Kalibr cruise missiles, Ka-101, Orlan 10 drones, Lancet, Cub, and artillery guidance systems. This is not just another strike on a rear facility, it is a targeted hit on a technological hub, without which modern Russian weaponry becomes blind and helpless. A successful strike on Resonit is a strategic weakening of the enemy for dozens of kilometers ahead. The beginning of a direct conflict with NATO. Trump has abandoned Europe. Russia is preparing an attack on NATO. The head of German intelligence is sounding the alarm. Berlin has evidence the Kremlin is planning a provocation against alliance countries to test the infamous Article 5 in practice.
Russia is preparing to go to war with NATO. The head of Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, Bruno Kahl, stated that Russia is planning to test the effectiveness of NATO's Article 5. According to him, German intelligence has concrete evidence that the Kremlin is preparing for potential aggression against the alliance.
In reality, we all understand that the starting point for all these actions is the position of the new US administration, that is, the opposition to the Trump administration, which boils down to the fact that they do not plan to defend Europe, do not want to fight, or somehow be at odds with Russia, and want to reach some kind of agreements with Russia. But in fact, they are encouraging Russia to go ahead and test NATO, so to speak, for its weaknesses.
Kahl claims that Moscow no longer believes in the reliability of NATO's collective defense system, particularly Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which guarantees mutual protection in the event of an attack on one of the alliance's member countries. According to the German intelligence officer, the Kremlin might try to put this guarantee to the test in practice. German intelligence services already have evidence of this and are convinced that for Russia, the invasion of Ukraine is just one stage on its path toward the West.
Few people remember now, but before the war in Ukraine began, Russia issued an ultimatum not to Ukraine but to the US and NATO, demanding that they withdraw from Eastern Europe, which was formerly part of the Warsaw Pact.
Russia is indeed moving toward its goal slowly but surely.
There is information that Russia may use the military exercises planned for this summer in Belarus as a cover to conduct military operations against NATO countries.
The Russians are acting by the book, just as they did with Ukraine, claiming that Russian speakers are being oppressed and then moving troops under the guise of exercises.
Putin is promising some kind of offensive in Ukraine. Nevertheless, he's conducting some kind of exercises in Belarus and is concentrating very significant armed forces for these exercises. Well, to put it mildly, it's strange, considering that he literally counts every soldier, and all of them are supposed to be capturing something in Ukraine for him. So I think the time frame here is quite specific. It's the summer and fall of this year.
Nevertheless, Russia is unlikely to go for a full-scale capture of NATO countries. According to experts, to destroy the alliance, Putin would only need to seize a small part of any member country.
Right now, this scenario is more realistic than ever. And now it is based not only on theoretical calculations or some speculations, but on reality. And it is increasingly being reinforced by statements, actions, and the overall situation in Eastern Europe.
Currently, there are two main candidates for a Russian invasion, Latvia and Estonia. At the same time, diversionary maneuvers could also be directed toward Poland and Finland, about invasions of which there has been much talk lately.
Meanwhile, North Korea and Russia have improved Korean missiles and are now setting up the production of Shaheds directly in the DPRK. Iranian technologies are already in Pyongyang's hands. South Korea should prepare itself. The axis of evil is expanding. You can find all the details in this episode.
Russia is expanding North Korea's arsenal and improving the weapons it uses itself in the war against Ukraine.
An example of technological exchange is the KN-23 ballistic missiles. When Russia first received them, they deviated by several kilometers, but now they hit their targets precisely.
As of today, North Korea is Russia's largest military ally. Hundreds of ballistic missiles, millions of munitions, and tens of thousands of soldiers.
I would like to specifically mention the participation of servicemen from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the liberation of the border areas of the Kursk region.
In exchange, Pyongyang receives cheap oil, combat experience, technology, and modernization of its military-industrial complex from Moscow.
What does the improvement consist of? First and foremost, it's the guidance system. Accordingly, the deviation from the target for the North Korean KN-23 missiles was between 500 and 800 meters. So it was quite problematic to call it a high-precision weapon.
More than half of the KN-23 missiles from the first batches not only deviated from their trajectory, but also exploded in midair. Now, thanks to Russian assistance, North Korean ballistic technology has been significantly improved.
According to the same GUR data, the current accuracy of hitting a target is now within several tens of meters, which fully satisfies the Russian side. The North Korean copy of the Russian Iskander has similar tactical and technical characteristics, and notably, over the past year, the Russian Federation has been scaling up its use of precisely the North Korean KN-23.
Over the course of a year of cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang, North Korean ballistic missiles have evolved from low-quality, inaccurate munitions that exploded in the air to a high-quality analog of the Russian Iskander.
This is the result of joint work by Russian and North Korean specialists. There is also ongoing modernization of aerial weapons, long-range air-to-air missiles, specialized technologies on submarines, and unfortunately, ballistic missiles as well, which serve as carriers of nuclear payloads.
For Kim Jong-un, the war against Ukraine is an opportunity to acquire technologies and unique experience in waging modern aggressive warfare, including in the field of mass production of strike drones, which Pyongyang could use to terrorize its Asian neighbors.
If China truly does not want NATO to intervene in the affairs of Southeast Asia, then it should, in order to be consistent and without hesitation, stop North Korea's involvement in the war on European soil.
According to Ukrainian intelligence, North Korea is establishing production facilities to assemble Harpy and Jaran-type strike drones, which will lead to significant changes in the military balance of the entire region.
The United States has announced that its main focus is shifting to the Pacific region. Accordingly, the main threat from the intensification of military technical cooperation between Russia and the DPRK is, first and foremost, South Korea and Japan. It is no coincidence that recently Japan has been paying enormous attention to modernizing its own air and missile defense systems.
As of today, the military alliance between the two bloody dictators, Putin and Kim Jong-un, is a threat not only to Ukraine and Europe, but also to Asia.
That's all for today. Subscribe to the channel, leave your comments, hit the like button, and catch other news in the next episode of Hotspot.